reservation in private sector jobs? Well, we are discussing this today on India Revival Mission, as Haryana's new law is going to make it mandatory for the private companies to look for local talent for jobs. And there's a quota, 75%. That's right, with a salary of up to 50,000 rupees per month. Now, the idea is to create employment opportunities for locals, but the private sector isn't too happy. In fact, some members of the India Inc. have said that this is going to force them to look at other possible options, other possible states. But the point is that it is not the first time that a state has brought this kind of a bill. In fact, similar orders have been passed in the past as well in several other states. For example, Maharashtra ordered 80% quota for locals in November 2019. Then Karnataka ordered 75% quota for locals in 2016. Then Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh have also done the same thing. They've also come with similar orders in the past, but they were challenged. So the question is, can there really be reservation in private sector jobs? Is it even legal? Let's ask our experts joining us on India Revival Mission today. I am Hina Gambhir. We have with us Sabina Dewan, who is President and ED of Just Jobs Network and also Senior Fellow CPR. We have with us Mr. MS Unnikrishnan, Managing Director at Thermax. We have with us Prateek Som, Advocate, Supreme Court and a constitutional expert, and Kailash Adhikari, Managing Director, Governance Now. Appreciate all of you for joining us here on India Revival Mission. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Unnikrishnan. What are the concerns really? Why is India Inc. so unhappy with this new law?
Apart from the private organization reservation requirement, they also put in a minimum up to 50,000 rupees, which means it is not for blue collar alone. In majority of the earlier stipulations, whether it is Gujarat or whether it is Maharashtra or Karnataka, it is more intended to be for the blue collar, and it is understood very clearly in the MOUs that most of us signed with the respective governments that white collar is our choice. When you say up to 50,000, the entry levels of majority of the even trainee engineers could be almost 40, 45, 50,000 rupees. So this is something which is getting into intellectual capital oriented work, white collar job also getting reserved, which is not constitutional in any case. In any case, it will be a challenge, I'm sure, going forward. We understand that Haryana will want to have more and more industry coming over there. For that, they should be attracting investment rather than telling people that there are more stipulations. Every state is today competing with each other to have ease of doing business improved. So I would say it is not the right move in the right direction.
Okay.
They can always say that we would prefer, and possibly for blue collar in many industries, most of us do prefer local people. But for the white collar, there is no way we can have, you can't compare that it should only be, we want the intellectual capital across the country available to us. Those are all highly, not skill oriented. It is more of a capability oriented technology. So certainly this is not the right step taken by them.
Okay, not the right step, clearly. Prateek, so is this even constitutional? Is it even legal to force the private sector to have a quota system like this in the private sector jobs?
See, first of all, we have to understand that there are two undeniable facts in Haryana. One is that there is a very high unemployment rate as far as Haryana is concerned. And the other fact is that there has been rapid industrialization which Haryana has witnessed in last almost 1 decade. So how this industry has prospered or bloomed, that is because the state have supported the industry. They have got the subsidized lands, they have got the exemption on taxes, they have used the natural resources of the local areas. So basically the intent of the state government is that the local people should be part of their growth story, and the act has been very carefully drafted, keeping all the concerns of the industry as well. Just to point it out that 8 rounds of deliberation and consultations happened with industry leaders and other stakeholders, and the act has been fine-tuned to the minutest detail. Just to give you a small example, that section 5 of the act says that if an employer does not feel that he has got a proficient, skilled or a qualified employee, then he can file for the exemption to the appropriate authority, and if appropriate authority feels that it is justified, that as per the skill requirement of the job the employer is not satisfied, then he may ask for he may grant exemption in this case. Another very important point is that Haryana witnessed a major HR unrest, and that led to a major violence in which a Maruti official was also died. So that kind of concern came from industry, and a kind of clause, a proviso has been incorporated in this act, wherein employer will have a freedom that he can cap the hiring of local candidate up to 10% from any specific district. So this will avoid the local influence, the local pressures of sarpanch, local MLAs and all those people.
The sense that you are giving us, and Sabina, I want you to respond to what Mr. Som has mentioned. Now, the sense that we are getting after listening to Mr. Som is that, high unemployment rate is there in Haryana. The state has really supported the industry, and today we all know that as far as Haryana is concerned, half of the manufacturing of auto sector happens only in Haryana. A lot of Fortune 500 companies have got their headquarters in Haryana. So, now it is time to pay back. It is now time to support the state. The question is, can the state expect to fulfill its social objectives via laws like these?
We have over 30,000, this is Team Lease data, over 30,000 non-labor compliances already that businesses have to fulfill. And on top of that, now you're adding this new regulatory burden. I agree with Mr. Unnikrishnan completely that this is, that this is not a time to be adding to this compliance burden. And then the question is, if you're going to be granting waivers, if companies can't find workers with the right skills and you're granting waivers, then what's the point of the law anyway? You're just forcing companies to go through even more compliance paperwork and administrative hurdles to end up right exactly where they started to begin with. How do you even go about enforcing something like this?
Okay.
I think two more really quick points. I think this rule actually stifles labor mobility. Many economists will tell you that we actually want labor mobility so that labor can relocate to where there is demand. That is what promotes efficiency for business, efficiency for workers, and a better and healthier labor market. So, by restricting sort of labor mobility, as this quota will discourage labor mobility, I think that's particularly problematic.
Sabina, before I go across to Mr. Adhikari, I have one more very quick question for you. You started by saying that, it's a bad time, but then are you okay with this idea of asking private sector to reserve certain jobs for the locals?
No, I am not okay with that, because I think we have to promote, the way that you promote efficiency is by actually allowing labor to go where demand is. I mean, we saw this in the lockdown, right? The minute you stop having enough workers to do certain kinds of jobs, that becomes a problem. What we actually need is to promote labor mobility. We need, skilled workers to come into Haryana. We need migrant workers to come into Haryana. Labor will locate itself when there are opportunities. We need to be thinking as a broader market, not as a state by state. And particularly, again, I think adding the compliance burden on companies at this time when they're particularly hurting is completely unnecessary and will actually backfire if you can even enforce this law, which I question to begin with.
Mr. Adhikari, like I mentioned earlier, Haryana is not the first state, and here we are just not discussing Haryana. We're talking about this issue in general, because repeatedly in the past we've seen states coming out with this kind of a quota system, asking private sector to reserve certain jobs for locals or for a specific section of society. Is this legal? That's what I want to ask you. What are your comments?
As you mentioned in the beginning, that Haryana is not the first state. You mentioned about Maharashtra, Karnataka. And, even if you look at the current bill, it says about 75% of the jobs with incomes up to 50,000 to be provided to those people who are domiciled in the state of Haryana. It is not talking about any caste-based reservation, that provide to this particular caste or not. Now, if we look at the aspect, what goes behind the government's thought in bringing such this is that any government will think for their people. About any land concept of son of their soil. And as it was mentioned about the rising unemployment in Haryana, it will boost employment. And locals will also get a chance to get skilled better. that will not only enhance your more capabilities in terms of more education institutions, your skilled manpower, more vocational training it will be given. But yes, having said that, already certain rounds of negotiations and understandings between the sector has gone. And if there is anything that the private sector needs more consultation on, it can do with the government.
Mr. Unnikrishnan, will you like to respond to the arguments that have come so far in favor of this kind of a provision? And one of them is also that, one argument is that industry should also give back to the state in some way to help the people who have given their land for these industries to really come up. What is your point of view?
First and foremost, from a personal experience I'm giving, having set up more than 10 factories in India during my tenure in different states, I'm not naming them, I can vouch that we have employed predominant part of them from the state only. Especially for the lower paid sector, the blue collar, we normally adopt ITIs in the local areas and then we train manpower even before the factory construction starts. We always love to have the local people only to work in the factories because that improves the local ecosystem. We are able to do a lot more of CSR to improve their lot also. This is all done by all of us. I don't think it needs a stipulation. What you need to understand, fundamentally, I'll ask my friends who are batting for that it should be happening. Are you wanting to create a sub-nationality in your country? Are you an Indian or are you a Haryanvi or a Tamilian or a Andhra? So we already have enough and more cuts, vertical and horizontal. We are dividing this country. Let's not do any of that because please recognize industry doesn't have any sub-national interest at all.
Don't create sub-nationality, don't divide people on the basis of their place of birth, don't discriminate when it comes to, offering employment opportunities. I want Mr. Prateek Som and then Mr. Kailash Adhikari to respond to these arguments. Mr. Prateek Som, first to you.
Yes, I'll rebut with two very important points. As we all agree that Haryana is not the first state to implement such kind of law. Let me give you some data and figures and then the perspective towards this act will completely change.
Okay.
Maharashtra since 37 years has a Maharshi Act which states that 80% reservation for people who can speak Marathi in the jobs. And we all know that Maharashtra also has Mumbai, which is the financial capital of India. Just to give you a small data that as from the State Industries Department of Maharashtra, as on March 2019, of the nearly 12 lakh jobs in almost 3,000 industries that have claimed incentives from Maharashtra government, 10.6 lakhs jobs, that is 88.3%, are held by locals. And in micro, small and medium industries, of nearly 69 lakh jobs generated, 61 lakh jobs, that is 89% jobs, are held by locals. So has Maharashtra not seen rapid industrialization in last almost 30 years?
Okay.
Gujarat
so
has
you
same kind of
think this
law.
is the primary
Uttarakhand
reason
has,
why
Himachal
rapid
Pradesh
industrialization
has.
has happened? I'll get Sabina Dewan to respond to that very quickly. First respond, Mr. Som, to what Mr. Unnikrishnan mentioned specifically. The issue of sub-nationality that is being created with this.
See, that is not there. Even the constitution does not bar this. When all other states have this, the reason being is
but where
that
has
the
it been
state
implemented? You tell me, the other states
exemption
that I
on
mentioned,
taxes, their land
everywhere
and
this
other
was
things to
challenged,
industry.
Mr. Prateek
They
Som.
want that their local people should also
everywhere
get a chance
this was
to participate
challenged.
in
I
their
started with a
story.
long list
Another
of states
important thing
who
which I
came
want to
out with
tell
these
is-
kind of orders. Very quickly, yes. Andhra Pradesh, 75% quota for locals, challenged in High Court. Karnataka, 75% quota for locals, order challenged in High Court. You tell me, where has it been implemented?
It is implemented in Maharashtra, it is there in Gujarat, it is there in Himachal. The only reason why Andhra Pradesh Act could not be implemented was that that act was prepared it was enacted on the same day.
Okay.
So it was not consulted, not deliberated upon. Now another important point which I want to make is that what Haryana government is planning is to open up the ITI centers, vocational centers and skill centers around the industry. So the intent of the state government is the boy gets out of the school, gets enrolled into a ITI or a skill center, gets an appropriate required skill set and then apply for a job. So
Okay.
this is how the inclusive growth happens.
So
and that
the
is the
government,
intent
you're
of
saying,
this
is
government,
trying to
that
create a
the local
complete
people should
ecosystem
get
so that
skilled,
the
should get
industry
qualified,
also gets
and then
skilled
get a job.
manpower. Okay, Mr. Adhikari, quick response to what Mr. Unnikrishnan said, the kind of
Yes,
concerns that the industry has been raising.
No, firstly, I'd like to mention here that we all are Indians and we all will be Indians. So the issue of subnationality, I don't see in this bill. Secondly, even the government in its bill has categorically mentioned that if the particular employer feels that for that particular job, which is up to 50,000 a month, he's not getting a skilled manpower, he can file with the government, and based upon the arguments, he can get a
But
person.
aren't
who
you
is
then
for the
making
job.
things more difficult for the industry? That's the argument that has been coming. Because, you know, I'll tell you what, states
Yes.
today are competing with each other to woo the industry, to woo India Inc. so that they come and invest in various states. But aren't you then adding another layer and making it more and more complicated? That's the point that Mr. Unnikrishnan had also made.
It is not about making complicated. We should understand the fact that this is being done first for the locals. It is to boost their employment and also to boost their skill set. You know, as Mr. Som mentioned, that the entire plan behind the government's thinking of bringing this law is to develop the skill sets of the people who are domiciled in Haryana.
Okay.
I don't see that there is any wrong mention in that. And the issue of subnationality does not even arise.
Okay.
And, my parents could be born in some
So
other
you
state. I
believe
am
that
from
it's
Bombay. I am
not
born in
really an
Mumbai.
issue?
I am
Mr.
domiciled in
Sabina
Maharashtra.
wants to respond. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I really do want to respond because, first of all, the data that was presented with regards to Maharashtra, there's no evidence that data would be any different without the law, right? This is again to Mr. Unnikrishnan's point that, I mean, why are we assuming that companies would like to hire people from another state if you actually have the skilled workforce available in your state? To a company as an employer, and I own my own business, it doesn't matter to me where an employee or a potential candidate is from. What matters is this a person a good fit for my company and for the role that I want to have. So first of all, the point being that this data that was presented, there's no evidence that data would have been any different if the law had not been instituted. Second, I think it sounds really outlandish to me that we expect that companies are actually sitting there differentiating between workers that are from out of state and in state. What they're actually looking at is only the idea of how do I find the most skilled, appropriate person for the job that I have. Third, again, to Mr. Unnikrishnan's point, it's not just about having an Indian nationality and not creating these subnationalities,
Right.
but it's also the idea that our businesses operate in value chains, right? And that they're spread across the country, and there needs to be labor mobility in order to create a more efficient, effective way of operating. And
Right.
lastly, what I'll say is that as it is, we know this for a fact, that companies have a really hard time finding the right people for their jobs.
Absolutely.
At the same time that we have 364 million youth between the ages of 15 to 29 that are looking for jobs. So why are we making this more restrictive? Actually, what we need to do is promote labor market matching, not
Right.
make it more restrictive, reduce the non-labor compliances that companies have to adhere to. And there's nothing that stops the Haryana government from investing in their ITIs and polytechnics and making skills training more aligned to demand. You can
Right.
do all of these beautiful, brilliant things without having quotas on hiring locals. It
Well,
makes
I
no
think you've
sense.
summed it up quite
Thank you.
well. And we've got the arguments both for as well as against this provision that has now come as far as Haryana is concerned. We'll see what the government eventually does, because it is facing criticism from a lot of quarters right now. But what's very interesting is that in case efforts are made to, help the youth of Haryana or any other state become, get more skills and get more better, then probably they will be picked up sooner. And these kind of laws will not really be needed to, push them to be hired, because eventually it's merit that should matter and not the place of birth when it comes to hiring. I appreciate all of you for joining us on India Revival Mission.